Have you ever felt like you were holding up the walls of a building that was about to collapse? Have you ever had that unsettling feeling that something inside you needs to crumble, yet you do everything you can to keep the structure standing? Nietzsche once said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." But who among us willingly embraces chaos? Who among us has the courage to destroy what makes us feel safe, even if that safety is actually a prison? The fear of collapse is the fear of truth. Because deep down, we know that to become who we truly are, we first need to destroy everything we think we are. Just like a caterpillar cannot keep crawling if it wants to fly, we cannot carry the weight of our illusions if we want to be free. So let me ask you, what inside you needs to die? What have you been carrying for years, knowing it no longer makes sense, yet keeping it alive out of habit, fear, or convenience? This video is not for those who just want pretty reflections. It's for those who are ready to look in the mirror and recognize that the person they see may no longer be real. If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you already knows it's time to collapse. But before we go on this journey together, there's something you need to understand. The fall is inevitable. The only choice you have is whether you'll go down fighting or surrender to the process. Now take a deep breath, because what comes next may not be comfortable, but it may be necessary. Since childhood, we've been taught that stability is synonymous with security. Life tells us to build castles of certainty, predictable careers, solid relationships, well-defined identities. But are we merely stacking bricks in a condemned building? Stoic philosophy reminds us, nothing lasts forever. Everything flows. Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic thinker, put it even more bluntly, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man. And yet, we spend our lives resisting the one absolute truth. Everything is in motion, and any attempt to freeze reality is an invitation to suffering. The fear of change is the fear of loss, losing what is familiar, losing what defines us. But what happens when we hold on to something that was meant to leave? Like a dry branch snapping in a storm, the illusion of permanence eventually shatters, and those unprepared for the fall will be dragged down with the wreckage. More often than not, life pushes us toward collapse before we're ready. A relationship ends, a job disappears, a belief that once sustained us suddenly crumbles. The first reaction? Panic. We try to rebuild, we return to the ruins, we insist on reviving what is already gone. But what happens when we let go? When we accept that certain parts of us must fade so that new ones can emerge? Schopenhauer said that suffering arises from the struggle between what we want things to be and what they actually are. And it's this struggle that keeps us trapped. The more we resist, the more we suffer. The more we accept, the closer we come to true freedom. Imagine a butterfly trying to remain a caterpillar, clinging desperately to the ground, refusing to dissolve in the cocoon. What would happen? It would never fly. It would remain there, crawling forever, carrying the weight of what could have been. Now look at your life. How many times have you avoided collapse out of fear of losing solid ground? How many times have you held on to a relationship that had already ended emotionally, a career that no longer made sense, a version of yourself that no longer existed? The problem isn't the collapse, the problem is your resistance to it. So let me ask you, what are you afraid of? What within you needs to fall? Maybe it's the belief that you are strong and self-sufficient when, in reality, you need help. Maybe it's the mask of happiness you wear for others while, deep inside, you feel like you're falling apart. Maybe it's the certainty that you're on the right path when something in your soul is screaming that you're headed in the wrong direction. The truth is, nothing lasts forever, and the sooner you accept that, the less painful the collapse will be when it comes. The first step to freedom is recognizing that the ground beneath your feet was never fixed. It has always been shifting, and the only way to avoid falling is to learn how to dance with change. But dancing means letting go. It means surrendering to the collapse. Are you ready? If you've ever felt like you were about to collapse, you may have made the mistake of seeing it as the end. The problem is that we grow up believing that falling apart means failing, that losing control means being lost. But what if I told you that collapse is not the end, but the beginning of something greater? Nietzsche, one of the most provocative philosophers in history, said, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." But what he didn't say is that before you become stronger, you must first die. Not in the physical sense, but in the psychological one. The version of you that once was must die so that a new self can be born. Before a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it completely dissolves inside the cocoon. It doesn't simply grow wings. It breaks down, transforming into a formless, identityless, biological soup. The same happens to you when life throws you into the abyss of the unknown. Falling apart means losing everything that once defined us. The job that gave us status, the relationship that made us feel loved, the certainties that provided us with security. It's painful, but there is a quiet beauty in chaos. Freedom is the only true foundation of existence. But to be free, we must first lose everything that imprisons us. And this is where many people fail. Instead of allowing the collapse, they try to rebuild the ruins. They desperately cling to what has already died, trying to force it to work. But the truth is, some things need to end for good. And you know this. You know that some relationships no longer make sense, that some jobs no longer nourish you, that some versions of yourself no longer fit within your own skin. But fear paralyzes. Fear makes you resist the fall. And the more you resist, the more painful it becomes. Carl Jung once said, "He who looks outside dreams, but he who looks inside awakens." The problem is that looking inside means facing the void, the nothingness, the loss of identity that comes when everything that once defined us falls away. This is where many people give up. Halfway through, the moment they realize there are no guarantees on the other side. But this is exactly where true rebirth happens. You cannot become who you are meant to be without first breaking yourself apart. So I ask you, what inside you needs to die? What is holding back your flight? Collapse is not a punishment. It is a calling. The only question is, will you answer it? If you look around, you'll see a tragic spectacle. People living lives they don't want, upholding truths they don't believe in, carrying masks that have become so heavy they can barely move. And why? Because lying to yourself is more comfortable than facing the truth. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is condemned to be free." And that is one of the most unsettling ideas in existentialist philosophy. Because being free means having no excuses. It means that if your life isn't where it should be, it's not fate's fault, not society's fault, not someone else's fault. It's yours. And facing that head on is unbearable for most people. That's why we build castles of illusion to protect ourselves. We create narratives that justify our stagnation. We convince ourselves that we have no choice. But the truth is, we do. We always have. We lie to ourselves all the time. We say we're happy when, in reality, we're just comfortable. We say a job fulfills us when, in truth, it only pays the bills. We say we love someone when, deep down, we're just afraid of being alone. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called this silent despair, the life we lead without even realizing we're trapped in it. And the most tragic part? The longer we live inside this lie, the harder it is to escape. We become prisoners of our own illusion. But the problem with living a lie is that sooner or later, the truth finds a way to surface. It might come in the form of anxiety, depression, or an inexplicable exhaustion. It might feel like an internal emptiness that nothing seems to fill. Carl Jung called this the call of individuation, the need to become who we truly are. And that call can be ignored for a while, but never forever. Because at some point, the lie becomes unsustainable. At some point, something inside you rises up and says, "This is no longer enough." And when that happens, you have only two choices. Keep deceiving yourself and live a lukewarm life, without truth, without purpose, or accept the collapse and face what needs to be faced. The second option is harder. It's more painful, but it's the only one that leads to something real. So I ask you, what inside you is already screaming to be heard? What do you already know but are still afraid to admit? Because the only thing more terrifying than falling apart is living a life that was never truly yours. You can run from the truth for a while, but not forever. Sooner or later, it finds a way to make itself heard. It might come in a sleepless night, in a moment of silence, or in the empty stare that meets the mirror and realizes that something inside has already died, yet the body keeps moving. Because what do we do with the certainty that everything will eventually end? Do we hide in the comfort of routine? Do we make excuses not to change? Do we cling to lifeless relationships, to careers that drain us, to versions of ourselves that no longer make sense? The truth is, there is no escape. Collapse comes for everyone. The only difference is whether it happens by our choice or by life's force. There is a moment, an exact instant, when we know we can't go on like this. No matter how hard we try to convince ourselves otherwise, something inside us has already made the decision. The relationship is beyond repair. The job no longer makes sense. The identity we've built no longer fits. That moment is terrifying, because it means there's no turning back, but it's also sacred. Albert Camus once said, "The only truly serious philosophical question is whether or not life is worth living." And that decision happens in the instant we stop pretending we're fine and face head-on everything that needs to change. And here's what paralyzes us: the fear of not knowing what comes next, the fear of emptiness, the fear of the unknown. Because up until now, everything was planned. Even if we were unhappy, at least we knew what to expect. But what if we let go of everything? What if we walk away? Who guarantees that what comes next will be better? The answer? No one. And that's why so few cross this portal. Because crossing requires faith. Not religious faith, but faith in the process. Faith that there is something on the other side, even when everything now seems like ruins. In one of his most profound writings, Nietzsche wrote, "What if a demon were to creep after you one night and whisper, 'This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times again.'" Now think, if your life were to repeat for eternity exactly as it is today, would you accept it without hesitation, or would you feel an unbearable weight on your chest? If the answer is the latter, then maybe it's time to jump, because the abyss is not the end, it is merely the beginning of a new story. So you finally jumped, you left behind everything that no longer made sense, abandoned the certainties that kept you trapped, you collapsed, and now comes the hardest and most necessary stage of all, the void. The nothingness, the moment when you look around and realize that everything you once knew is gone, but the new hasn't arrived yet, and this is where most people give up. Carl Jung called this process the dark night of the soul, the period of profound deconstruction where we no longer know who we are. The old self has died, but the new one hasn't been born yet, and this void can feel unbearable. It's like walking through a desert with no map, no compass, no promise of an oasis at the end of the journey. Many people turn back at this point. They desperately search for anything familiar, an old relationship, a destructive habit, a routine that no longer makes sense, because anything, even familiar pain, feels more comfortable than absolute emptiness. But the truth is, there is no going back. You might try to reclaim your old identity, but it will no longer fit. You might try to step back into old roles, but something inside you has already changed. And that, despite being terrifying, is a great gift. We crave immediate answers. We want to be reborn as soon as possible, but the journey through the void cannot be rushed. A butterfly cannot leave its cocoon before its time. If it tries to force its way out, its wings will never fully form. The same goes for you. The void is not a punishment, it is a womb, a place of gestation, an incubation of the new. What if you try to escape too soon and never find out what could have been? And that is the secret of the transition, trusting that your new self is taking shape, even when everything seems meaningless right now. Crossing the void requires patience. It demands that you stay present, even without answers. And above all, it requires that you don't try to rush the process. Because it's precisely in this space of uncertainty that transformation happens. The cocoon must remain closed until the right moment arrives. The only question is, do you have the courage to wait? After the fall, the chaos, and the emptiness, something unexpected happens. One day, without warning, you realize that something inside you has changed. You are no longer who you used to be. The things that once affected you no longer have the same impact. The people who once held you back no longer have power over you. The worries that used to consume your mind now seem insignificant. You have been reborn. But here's the detail no one tells you. Rebirth doesn't happen in a flash, a dramatic epiphany, or some grand moment. It happens quietly, in small details. The day you wake up and feel lighter. The conversation where, for the first time, you speak your truth without fear. The moment you choose the new instead of the old. Life is a constant cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. What fell needed to fall, what died needed to die. And now, without the weight of the past, you have space for something new. But there is something fundamental you need to understand. Rebirth doesn't mean the pain has disappeared. It simply means you've learned to carry it differently. Nietzsche called it amor fati, the love of fate, accepting everything that has happened, not as a burden, but as an essential part of the journey. Nothing was in vain, nothing was a mistake. Everything has led you precisely to this moment. Now, you have that freedom. You are no longer bound by the expectations of others, the roles imposed on you, the lies you told yourself. Now, you can choose. And that is the most terrifying and the most beautiful part of rebirth, because there are no more excuses. What you do from this point forward is entirely up to you. The caterpillar doesn't know it will become a butterfly. It simply follows the call of transformation. And you did the same. You went through the collapse. You unraveled. You endured the emptiness. And now, without even realizing it, you already have wings. The only thing left is one final question. Are you ready to fly? So, we've reached the end of this journey. But is it really the end? If there's one thing we've learned here, it's that every ending is just a new beginning in disguise. You made it this far because, in some way, you knew that something inside you needed to break. You knew you couldn't keep carrying the weight of illusions, the lies you told yourself, the outdated versions of who you used to be. You felt the call for change, and now you understand. Collapse is not a punishment, it's a liberation. What if, instead of fearing collapse, you embraced it as a natural part of life? What if, instead of resisting change, you surrendered to it? What if, instead of clinging to what has already died, you welcomed what is ready to be born? The butterfly doesn't mourn the death of the caterpillar. The river doesn't try to flow back to its source. Time doesn't run backward. And you? What do you choose to do now? Because in the end, what truly holds us back is not pain, nor fear, nor doubt. What holds us back is the refusal to accept that we are already free. So I ask you one last time, will you keep holding on to the wreckage? Or will you finally let go? The choice has always been yours. Many people started this journey, but few had the courage to see it through. Few had the courage to face their own collapse, to look inside and admit truths they preferred to ignore. And if you've made it through all of this, if you felt the weight of every word and you're still here, then you are part of a brave minority, the ones who aren't afraid to be reborn. And maybe that's the biggest lesson in all of this. Accepting that change is not a choice, but a destiny. You are no longer the person you were at the beginning of this video. Maybe you don't yet know exactly who you've become, but one thing is certain. You've already started to change. That alone is a revolutionary act. And now I want to hear from you. In the comments, tell me, what was the moment you realized you needed to fall apart? What do you already know you need to let go of? What inside you has already died, but you still insist on keeping alive? If there's one thing we've learned here, it's that the journey through collapse doesn't have to be lonely. There are many of us, even when it doesn't seem like it. And if you want to continue this journey, if you want to go deeper, if you want to exchange ideas with people on the same path, you know where to find me. And do you really think you're just going to close this video and go back to your life as if nothing happened? As if you hadn't just faced an uncomfortable truth? As if you hadn't felt something shift inside you? You know something has changed. And now, you have a choice. You can pretend nothing happened and move on, or you can truly be part of this journey. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel. Because honestly, if this video got to you, the next ones will tear you apart completely and rebuild you in ways you never imagined. And since you're still here, do this. Like the video. Not for the algorithm, not for me. Do it because it means you're admitting to yourself that something here made sense, that something touched you. And recognizing that is already a first step. Now, take a look at these videos on the screen. Choose wisely. One of them might be the final push you needed. The other, well, it might be the slap in the face you've been avoiding your whole life. The choice has always been yours. See you there?